Hello, Internet. Wait, that's not my intro. Hiya, it's your boy. I wanted to make this video like 6 months ago, but, self-doubt is crippling. It actually wasn't until very recently I wanted to approach this video again, because I saw this post on the Avatar subreddit discussing every album the band has released that put me back on my bullshit. Alrighty, so my favorite band of all time is Avatar. Though sometimes other bands may hold my attention more, Avatar, from Black Waltz onward, is one of the tightest, cleanest, liveliest, most creative bands of all time. And my favorite album, without question, is Feathers and Flesh. And it's clearly a lot of other people's favorite too. That post I mentioned earlier is interesting considering the community as a whole decided to skip the worst track section for Feathers and Flesh. The album is beloved and paved the way for Avatar's continued relevance for years to come. And I want to talk about why this album is so great, what it means, and kind of what it means to me. I'll start with the basic background. Avatar originally wanted to base the album on fairy tales and folklore, but as they were writing, they figured, hey, why don't we just make our own fairy tale to write about?
Well, it's a fable about an owl. In her world, there's only ever been night. But this particular night, an eagle arrives, and he proclaims that your rule is about to come to an end. My kingdom will come because I bring the dawn with me. And so step aside, and she figures, if I kill the eagle, I will stop the sun.
And thus, Feathers and Flesh was born. The tale they tell is, as you can guess, a little twisted. Most stories with animals have certain traits to them. Eagles are noble, strong, brave. Owls are wise, quiet, and mysterious, etc. Not so much here. They have those expectations of characterization, only to emphasize how twisted and dark each character truly is. I think the biggest thing that sets this album up for success, and honestly, this is great advice for albums as a whole, is consistency in theme and concept. While Avatar's music can seem all over the place with shrieking, singing, clean guitars, loud solos, it's the story they tell through the music and placing of each song that give the album its strength. And honestly, I think I gotta talk about each song individually. I'll talk about the story as a whole, while also looking at how Avatar perfectly encapsulated the emotion and story in each song. And feel free to listen along. I certainly can't play the music here. Our opening track starts at the end of our story. This is one of those, you're probably wondering how I got here, style pieces. Starting here, though, is actually very clever, because as the album progresses, it can be interpreted as our main character, the owl, watching her life flash before her eyes. The track itself is Avatar's first go at a full-on intro song, and it sets the tone wonderfully. It opens quietly, with clean guitar that feeds into an awing chorus and organ. And once Johannes starts singing, and he hits that final no, boom, full band comes in, playing along to the same melody we heard Johannes sing. It all culminates in a soaring guitar solo from Tim, and that term soaring is intentional as it bleeds right into the next track. House of Eternal Hunt is a very neoclassical style piece, like a Bach fugue, highlighting the very fairy tale nature of the story. And it works doubly well as the Owl's anthem. At least the band calls it the Owl's anthem, but then again, what do they know? Being as fugues are seen as perfectly constructed counterpoint hell, having this style of music tells the listener that the Owl's view of things is perfect. Not literally, of course, but from the Owl's perspective. She sees herself as master of this domain. And in a way, that's because she is. With the moon in the sky, she alone flies above the forest. The song also mentions the prophecy about to be told, with lyrics like, "It has been foretold this land will live and die by my hand." The prophecy has fed into the owl's ego and further fuels her hubris, which will ultimately lead to her situation a few songs from now. Looking at the song for just the music, it does things very cleverly. Totally different than most bands would do this kind of song. See, Johannes is a very talented vocalist in metal, being able to both scream and sing. In most bands that have singing and screaming, they sing during the chorus and then scream the verses. Instead, Johannes turns that around. This is actually a pretty cool way to present the idea of the story not following the conventions and tropes of traditional fairy tales. Eventually, we come to this tranquil part. It's one of the most unique parts of the song, melodically and musically, where everything has been driven and charging, coming off of an incredible guitar solo. there's this moment of peace, and Johannes, or the owl, depending on how you look at it, sings, "I take one last look at the Emerald Towers. The end has come. Please hunt with me one last time. The Emerald Towers are swallowed by the sun." The owl's ultimate enemy is herself, but she, like many who let their pride dictate their actions, need a tangible foe, something other to oppose. And who comes flying in right as the echo of the harpsichord dies out? There's a reason this song has featured in every setlist Avatar has crafted since its release. This track is the crowd pleaser. We are introduced to our antagonist, the eagle, and what a character he is. Every metalhead wants to play the villain. Hell, every person does. Because we've all been on the receiving end of an unfair situation. And villains are often written with more depth than the typical hero, or at least are given reason for why they do what they do. But I digress. The main riff really does make this song. The melody is complex in rhythm, but simple in notes, which I'd argue is one of the best aspects of music in general, actually. I'm a sucker for fun rhythms. Plus, while not every song has a music video, Johannes' acting in The Eagle Has Landed's music video perfectly captures the attitude of this character. Just look at his cocky strut. Look at the way he helps people and puts them into worse situations. Overall, this song is just the whole package. The verses work both in context of the story and as a standalone piece. Speaking of that story, just because it's kind of one of the main parts of this video essay, the first verse presents the eagle as he sees himself, talking down to the world. In the second, it's actually the owl who approaches him, telling him off, to which Johannes, or the eagle, does that sick laugh, conveying the bravado the eagle holds himself to. And yeah, the chorus is really where it's all at. It perfectly toes the line between jovial and pompous, serious and unserious, perfectly encapsulating the eagle's own pride. Where the owl considers herself queen of the night, the eagle is king of the sun, bringer of the day. While the sun is generally seen as this positive aspect, in this context, it's the aggressor, and the worst kind, an aggressor that's worshipped. Yeah, remember how we've all been on the receiving end of an unfair situation? Yeah, imagine that, but you're against somebody so beloved, it's impossible to appear like the good guy, no matter how right you may actually be. Like, imagine having beef with Markiplier. Good fucking luck, dude. Oh yeah, this song has an outro, and it's fine. Musically, it's very sound, and in this recent live set list, it works great as a moment for Johannes to do a costume change. On the album, it can seem kinda like a longer end to what was otherwise a pretty punchy and tight song, but honestly, I wouldn't change a thing about it, because it works as the perfect precursor to the next track. So in context of the story, the eagle has just threatened to eat the owl's eggs if she opposes him. And as such, she takes her eggs and sequesters them. And it's actually some of the most clever commentary you can find in music. Like, no surprise because this is Avatar we're talking about, but like, dude, this shit's clever. Starting with the real life commentary, the eagle threatens the owl, and the owl takes her eggs and promises to protect them. She tells them, "Fly beyond the ocean. Try to find our place. Home is somewhere out there. Somewhere you'll be safe. Sleep, my child, and dream of the new land." In an interview about this song, says it's an empty promise because you cannot always protect your children from the world. The idea that people who crave power will never ultimately hold it because they can't control every aspect of life. Johannes likens it to terror attacks. Whether or not one actually occurs is totally beyond your control, and letting that fear guide you ultimately leads to ruin. This exact idea was actually built upon a song off their previous album, Hail the Apocalypse, called Tower. The idea of this deranged man keeping a child locked in a tower, not for his own selfish needs, but because he thinks it's the only way to keep the child safe. It's the classic surviving versus living scenario. Honestly, it's something that I think needs to be constantly repeated. With how diverse conflicts are growing, it's hard to not be left with fear, guilt, the weight of the world upon your shoulders, and people holding this intense weight, letting it be pressed upon them for any amount of reasons, whether social, emotional, and ultimately left paralyzed because there's nothing for them to do. But that's the most wonderful thing. There's nothing we can do. There's nothing to do. It's like when Granddad says this to Huey in the Boondocks.
"Granddad, what do you do when you can't do nothing, but there's nothing you can do?"
You do what you can.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the music. The song is very ethereal. Johannes sings most of the chorus much lower than usual, harkening back to his earlier clean singing. The guitars are also pretty out of the way. They aren't too aggressive, which is probably a representation of how the owl is trying to console her children while concealing her frustration. The overall tone acts as a nice sample of what Avatar is becoming. I want to take a moment to talk about that, actually. For those who don't know, Avatar started as a melodic death metal band. It wasn't until their self-titled album that they began to push the boundaries of that music, breaking out of the shell that is genre. This album, therefore, solidifies their new, groovy, eccentric sound. No longer are we confined to the rules of melodeath. Now, they're just Avatar, free to make whatever they feel. And this song acts as a great example of that growth. As we reach the end of the song, the owl has successfully hidden her eggs, and now she's out for blood. With no worries within her, she enlists the creatures of the forest to take up arms. Fun fact about this song, the clapping you hear is actually the band members slapping their bare asses into the mic. This is because it's a lot easier to record the loud slapping of skin versus actual clapping. Sounds asinine, but then again, we spent most of our televised history believing that the bald eagle has the screech of the red-tailed hawk, so it's always been what gets the job done. Anyway, tooth, beak, and claw. Like I said, at this point in the story, the eggs are safe and the owl is pissed. She sees the forest for the first time in the daytime. She allows herself to become unhinged, calling upon her fellow creatures of the night, uniting them to oppose the eagle. This piece opens with this spoken word, weird vocalization on the part of Johannes, most likely intended to be the owl spreading rumors about the eagle, thus rallying the creatures of the night. This refrain is repeated again over the bridge, acting as the reminder for the creatures of why they're uniting. Cool part about this is it also kind of changes, kind of going with the idea of how rumors kind of change and take new shapes over time. Whereas most riot and fight songs are presented like marches, this song is actually groovy as hell. I mean, just listen to that opening guitar slide. It's like something straight out of surf rock. The song really opens up in the chorus. Very little movement comes from the rest of the band, as if the crowd is taking moments hyping themselves up to continue the charge. And honestly, the idea that this march, if you can call it that, is this groovy, rockabilly kind of beat, actually sells the idea of a mob better than it otherwise would be. As the legend Ronnie James Dio once said, the mob rules. People lose themselves when they come together, which is why coming together is so important. In unison, we have power, and unfortunately, it can often divulge into violence. This song is a representation of what we see play out in real life, and it will take a few more tracks to see where this leads them. But that kind of bears the question, what do you take from this? Is unifying actually wrong? Is being an individual on the outside really the best thing to do? Well, hold on to that thought, because as the owl comes to recruit new allies, we see this exact idea channeled in a totally different light. We begin to enter the owl's observation of the many daytime folks of the forest, starting with the insects. The owl finds a group, a pod. Here, let me check. Oh my god, I'm an idiot. It's a colony. Of course it is. Anyway, the owl meets a colony of bees, and she asks them to join her cause, to which the bees reject the proposal. They see her cause as very singular. They see through her honeyed words, if you will.
I get it! Shut it, Nappa.
Okay, never mind. They see her for what she really is. Something I love about this song in particular is how it both serves the narrative and stands on its own. At face value, the song obviously channels that bee mentality. This organization and fascination of bees is prevalent all over various cultures, although generally, it's often viewed with a lens of fear, channeling phrases like hive mind, the idea of losing individuality to serve a single power. And yet this song actually channels the opposite. It isn't individuality being sacrificed here, it's ego. 1,000 eyes don't see themselves. Once one abandons their expectations of themselves in the picture, they actually grow past themselves to better serve the greater good. It also differentiates for the sisterhood in the second chorus, serving the bee narrative with the queen, who stands as a symbol for our own lives, helping people who haven't been in the limelight of power. It isn't about propagating a new absolute, it's lifting everyone up to the same level. It creates this strong opposition for the owl, who's also a woman, but has more selfish goals. I humbly ask you to consider the why as opposed to the what. Moving on. In our next piece, the eagle is met with a cricket, or an ant, some sort of tiny crawling insect. Anyway, the insect is mourning its partner. According to Johannes, it's the first time the owl is shown to experience sadness and loss. And the craziest part about this is it's not her own. We see an inspiration of empathy in the owl for a moment, and it eats at her, realizing that maybe war isn't the answer. Probably should have thought about that before summoning the mob, but It's funny because we all know this, and yet we're reminded constantly of how terrible it can be. And yet narratively, we gravitate towards it. Literally, every story ever told involves, to some extent, conflict, opposing forces, clashing ideals, is as ingrained into our being as food and water. And honestly, all organisms are in a giant fight to either survive or thrive. But conflict is very different than war. Conflict has no shame. It is pure in its pursuit. Animals will fight each other, but not out of hatred, just out of simple self-interest. It might seem shallow, and oftentimes the purest things are. The difference is, with humans and all their cognition, their shallowness sticks out a lot more. And it's hard to remind ourselves that we can be contradictory. The owl doesn't question her pursuits, not until she sees this single insect in mourning. She takes off deep into the forest to hide. The only way I can describe this song is as uncomfortably beautiful. The weird strumming, the vocalization, it paints this truly warped beauty. You know how I keep saying the way each song is presented makes their story that much stronger? Well, this is another prime example. In the same way this triggered the new emotion of empathy in the owl, the fact that this song is very melodic, ballad-like, it's a perfect way to introduce new people to the idea of what metal is capable of. Too often, a lot of my fellow metalheads try to show as brutal as metal can get, almost in a way to scare people off. The problem is that heaviness is something that we already know. Everybody has this idea of metal being this scary, intense genre. So showing them a slow, melodic, yet still intense song like this is a great gateway door. So, the owl has stirred the mob and then suddenly decides, oh, I don't want to fight. Death and destruction is bad, actually. But she kind of forgot to, stop the mob. Honestly, this album gets better and better commentary the more I listen to it. Let's check in, see what the mob is up to. Alrighty, at this point, night is returning. The owl has fled, reflecting on what she might bring upon the forest, completely oblivious to the fact that she has already led her followers to attack the eagle on her behalf. And spoiler warning, most of them die. One of the coolest aspects of this song is in the verses. So this song is in the key of E minor, right? Well, Johannes holds himself to the note A sharp or B flat for the entire time, basically, which is 6 half steps from E. This is what's known in music as a tritone, and it is the furthest distance a note can be from the key, either up or down, creating the most dissonant chord to the human ear, perfectly mirroring the mob's chaotic nature, their disconnect and dissolution from the battle, as they're killed off one by the eagle. It's a bizarre piece, for sure, but I like to think very clever. There's this refrain Johannes sings of names. I'd give a soul for a name. As the mob is trying to go by one name, no longer wanting to be individuals. Whereas the swarm fell under a single name to better themselves for the greater good, this mob is fueled by hate, unwilling to take responsibility for themselves as individuals. They're using the mob mentality as an excuse for their actions. Meanwhile, the chorus doesn't stick to the tritone bit. It sounds a little more harmonious with the rest of the band. It represents the mob opening their eyes to reality as they're picked off, and it ends with Johannes howling, "You've cursed us all." So with that, the eagle has opened the eyes of the mob. They've been had, but I'm sure everything will be okay. They learned something. Surely they will go back home to peacefully relax, maybe reflecting on their actions as well as our 2 focal points. Speaking of which, let's check on the owl, shall we? And with that, the sun has set. The eagle seems victorious, and as the owl continues to flee, we meet the slimiest resident of the forest. As she dives into a lake, encountering a fish, who tells her to stay, dwell in the dark with him, and that his domain will keep her safe from the outside world. It's clear the song is an allegory for depression, with the slow, bluesy tones to the lyrical content. Every word the pike says is drenched in malice, meant to break the owl down, despite reassuring her that he is her friend and that she is safe from the sun with him. I'm sure we all know someone like this in our lives. Hell, I know for a fact we all have someone like this. Ourselves. It's hard to pull yourself up after being knocked down. And as much as the outside world affects us, it's ultimately us ourselves who let the pain settle in. And can you really blame anyone, though? Humans are emotionally sensitive creatures. It's hard to admit that we can't face all of life's pressures head on all the time, even if we know it to be beneficial. The pike doesn't care for the owl for her own sake, only that she can keep him company. And if that sounds like a very not good relationship, good! It's not! It's something we see all the time, and that's what makes it so dark. It's personal. Actually, now that I think about it, Avatar has made a lot of songs on the idea of codependency. A Secret Door, Tower, Valley of Disease. Can somebody make sure Johannes is okay? He probably needs a wellness check. The pike's words seep into the owl at this point. She's sensitive, vulnerable, and so begins to believe that she should stay here. That is, until... A surprising yet well-timed pick-me-up. This track is apparently very difficult to play, despite how catchy it is, which isn't too common because catchy stuff is usually very easy to play. Anyway, the owl meets a wolf who vows to join her in the quest to make night never ending. Hey, that's the name of the track! With only one verse and 3 choruses and plenty of music throughout, it kind of fits the idea that the owl is trying to stand back up. The verse breaks that initial wall she encased herself in, and the choruses act like a little mantra she repeats to herself as she comes back more and more. The track is bouncy, jovial, odd yet perfectly placed, if that makes any sense. In the context of this album, it's the perfect pick-me-up after the downers and a nice palate cleanser for the next track. And in context of the lyrics, it perfectly matches the delusional hope the owl and wolf have. And I guess I have to talk about that wolf now. He is old, too old to fight for himself, and yet he persists. Where have we heard that before? He was once a warrior himself. He feels the need to join in on any fight he can stuff himself into. He inspires the owl so that he can live through her, feel useful, when it would be more beneficial to simply stand out of the way and accept that he doesn't have to be at the center of attention or conflict anymore. The owl, while misguided, has her ideas and intentions. And that's what makes this nuance of this relationship so real. They both feel entitled to the cause, leaning back into the misguided view. And yet that glimmer helps the owl feel better, stand back up. Johannes compares it to real life, saying how people change, but sometimes we need to embrace that we are who we are. So the owl is convinced. The wolf goes with her to confront the eagle. The mob, having been betrayed, let that groupthink get to them. They can't target their anger properly. So they turn it outward. Let's see how that goes for them. The battle is underway. The eagle and owl fight alone, and the forest around them begins to burn. According to Johannes, the verses are being said by both the owl and the eagle in unison. Wild how much they truly have in common. Both so consumed in themselves they would rather destroy the forest than come to some sort of agreement. So if I remember correctly, this is the only track on Feathers and Flesh that hasn't been played live ever, if I'm reading this correct. And I think it's kind of surprising because it's just as deep and potent as any other track on this album. The main perspective we're presented with is of a specific character we haven't seen yet, a bear. In the bridge of the song, we hear the bear say, "As I go to the river to drink, I learned that your tears all taste exactly the same." The band, mostly Johannes, explained that it represents how opposing forces often have more in common with each other despite the extremes.
You go far enough left, eventually you'll meet someone who's gone far enough right to get to the same place.
If you recall from House of Eternal Hunt, the Emerald Towers are swallowed by the sun. Well, it is this song we are shown exactly what that means. The sun is not daylight, but fire. And the chorus, representing the bystanding animals, describes their perspective on the horror befalling them. It seems in a twisted way, the owl has gotten what she wanted. The eagle brings the day, and the sun, represented by fire, is burning the forest. It's incredible because it's so allegorical. History is written by the victors, and while both tyrants were disgusting and wrong in their actions, as the eagle dies, the animals begin to pray the sun away, as if hoping that the wrong person is the one who dies. With the many conflicts around the world, the vocally extreme try to sway us one way or another. In a way, this song, which honestly, I tend to forget, but wait, maybe that's the point. It's a reminder that this tale is as old as time, and even after we learn it, it comes up again. Man, talk about a turnaround. When I first checked this album out, this song really didn't stand out to me at all. And now it's one of the highlights of the album, being this hauntingly beautiful and aggressive ballad. Anyway, everyone's dead! Well, except for the owl. Sure, the eagle's dead, but she can't even revel in the victory as the forest around her burns. And if things weren't bad enough, the wolf, the friend who motivated her to get back into this fight, bleeds out. The wolf has gotten everything he's wanted, but it's in the way he frankly deserves. His own pride to keep fighting for a cause kept him fighting far past his prime. He had no place in this fight, but he did anyway, and so now he gets the warrior's death he thought he wanted. It's a metaphor we've seen plenty times before. The old want to hold on to the world because they refuse to trust the newer generations, and their need to cling to their own mythos ends up bringing ruin. Although in this story it's more satisfying because the wolf suffers as well. Many leaders get away with their clinging. It goes to show eventually, though it may not always be apparent, things turn out. The song is very uniquely placed. We've been hit by these weird, energetic, experimental deep cuts, and what we have now is basically another ballad. It slows down quite a bit, while holding on to that classic Avatar style in the verses before hitting us with this chilling chorus. It's hard to appreciate this deep in. It's sung much lower and quietly. It mirrors the owl confronting the wolf as he dies, trying not to excite him too much so he doesn't die prematurely. 'Cause man, that would be terrible if this already old wolf with no place in this fight happened to die prematurely. See how it's so clever? The outro is truly the best part. Johannes picks his voice up the octave, getting us reinvigorated one last time for the last two pieces. It actually works doubly well with the owl's constant repetition of "we'll hunt another day," but I digress. As an aside, something I just realized as I was recording this is that main guitar lick is actually the Dies Irae, which is an ancient Gregorian chant that was originally used for funeral marches. It's been used in tons of music, everything from classical to movie soundtracks. As the wolf's eyes close to the murky unknown of what comes next, the owl realizes her time is equally waning, and if she wants to see the eggs she so desperately wanted to save, she must move quickly. As such, she's unaware of these new characters who have come to inspect the carnage. Oh yeah. This one's a favorite. Kind of separate from the narrative if you were to read it totally from the owl's perspective, but in this album, it works super well. We're met with a pack of 99 ravens arriving on the battlefield, compelled by the stench of blood. Johannes likens these ravens to war manufacturers, political figures, profiting off the misery they create in people. Whereas in the real world, they take our money and sanity. These ravens go straight for the throat, picking off the dead and dying. Frankly, much nicer than actual politicians. This track is something else, man. The band describes it as psychedelic, and I agree wholeheartedly. It's a different flavor of psychedelic, more like Slipknot's Prosthetics or Rammstein's Mind Tile. Just so dark and creepy, vivid in its delivery. The verse bounces between minor thirds, with John playing this 1-2 drum beat basically the whole time, slamming each pulse. And the crazy part is, it's swung on top of that. The chorus is equally sinister. Johannes doesn't move his voice that much at all, and if he does, it's by very small intervals. When the harmony comes in, it just elevates that creep factor. And yet, that's not even the surface of how weird this song gets. It's got a goddamn jazz break. Like, what? I love it. The chords Kungen and Tim are playing really capture the surrealist take on this piece. It's wide, heavy, full of color in terms of chords, while being very firm and minor in tones. And then there's that ending. Holy shit, when the instruments drop out and it's just Johannes for a second, oh man. And then after, the whole piece starts turning, coiling on itself, like an Ouroboros, maybe channeling the imagery of the ravens crowding each other as they pick the other animals' bodies clean, and the drums go from jazz groove to straight for just a few of the last seconds. It's such a jam. A real nice deep cut for sure. Hey, look at that. We're at the last track. I wonder how far the owl got. Oh. As daylight returns, we are met with the same melody and lyrics heard in Regret. Johannes sings very quietly, with no accompaniment. We now know how we've arrived at this point, and we witness the owl die. The owl can't accept things the way they are, wishing only to start over. But obviously that's not possible. The fact of the matter is that it did happen. There's nothing that can be done to fix that. The owl can't live with this reality, and so she dies. And it's that acceptance that truly ends the album. I'm gonna be real. I can't name a single person without death anxiety. To be honest, it's something that held me back from even making this video. It's something we haven't confronted yet, or currently bogged down by, or something we're trying to come to terms with. It's the reason religion holds such power in the world. Confronting what happens after life is basically impossible no matter what you believe. We can't know, ever really. Not if there's anything or nothing. We will never know. Even if you can come to terms with that, it's not something anyone can even comprehend. So what's there to do? Simple. Nothing. As scary as it is, to dwell on it is worse. It comes for us all. All we can do is our best. We make mistakes. Everyone does. But to dwell on it, letting it hold us down, is pointless. Many people might say regret helps people become better, but to wish that suffering on another is harsh. Don't bog each other down. Life is too beautiful to harbor onto pain. All we can do is our best. And when the time finally comes, there's nothing to do but let it come. Oh, man, this was honestly really fun to come back to. It's hard to admit that I let my own doubt about my work and life bog me down. And I appreciate all of you for allowing me to talk about one of my favorite albums of all time, tackling many difficult, poignant, and personal subjects, all while telling this cohesive narrative. Not even to mention how truly beautiful it is musically. It's a perfect recipe for success, and everything I'd want out of an experience, let alone an album. I don't know when I'll see y'all again, but I will. Take care of yourselves.